Hello and welcome to the Inspire Outcomes instructional video for the Universal Mobility Coach System, which will from here on be called the UMCS. This video is intended to assist you in becoming more familiar with the transitional functions of the UMCS. Prior to using the UMCS, there are several important safety considerations. First of all, the maximum weight limit is 400 pounds. However, body mass distribution varies from patient to patient. It is imperative and the responsibility of the end user to ensure that the patient is adequately supported. If the patient and/or the therapist feel that the patient's body weight is not supported adequately by the UMCS, discontinue use and seek direction from the manufacturer. Secondly, never use the elastic strap alone. Always use it in combination with the long or the short rigid connector straps. The elastic bungee strap has not been load tested and is designed to be an assistance rather than to replace the rigid connector strap, which has been load tested. Third, always double check your carabiner connections when you're connecting either the connector straps or the components of the Universal Mobility Coach system. Make sure the carabiners are properly snapped through the webbing loops and are closed completely, and the webbing loops are not half in and half out of the carabiner clip. Ensure that the Universal Mobility Coach system is not pinching the patient. Ensure that body parts are not pinched between components or within the carabiner mechanism. The UMCS is not a dependent system. It is designed to work actively with the patient. It is designed to catch the patient's weight should they lose their balance or should they stumble for a moment, and also if you're working on floor work to help assist the patient up to a sitting or standing position to a vertical surface. And it will lift the patient. However, it must be remembered that it is not primarily designed to be a dependent lift from one surface to another. Always check the UMCS for signs of wear prior to use. Check the webbing loops, check the straps, check the buckles to make sure that there is no loose stitching and no tears or wear marks on the UMCS. Ensure the buckles close properly. The parachute buckles in the belt strap tighteners or on the adjustable length mechanism for the connector straps or the thigh supports or the torso supports should always be checked to make sure they are properly closed. Also, it is important to check for compatibility with your patient lift company to ensure that the UMCS is an approved sling for use with their lifting device. And lastly, only use the components that are approved for use with the UMCS, including the connector straps, the bungee cord straps, and the carabiners. Do not substitute with unapproved pieces. So to move into the use of the UMCS, inserting the pelvic belt, this can be done in sitting by sliding down the patient's back, or in supine by having the patient roll each way, or by inserting into the small of their back and sliding down. To insert the pelvic belt, you fold the pelvic belt on itself with the buckles to the inside. If you're using attachments such as the torso support to bring the patient up from supine or side lying, or the thigh supports if you know you're going to do sit to stand or standing activities, fold them to the inside also. If the patient can roll, have them do so and push the belt through the natural lordosis. This can also be done in supine if the patient cannot roll. Make sure the torso strap is on the top of the belt and the thigh supports are at the bottom. By doing this, you will avoid some unnecessary frustration in having to take the belt out and putting it back in. Normally, I would come to the near side to show this so that I could properly unfold the torso support. However, I wanted to show how it's done. Make sure the torso support comes high enough above on the patient to provide enough upper back or rib support. Snap the buckles and do a two-handed cinching right, left, quickly. This will get the belt good and snug. You want the belt to be low over the pelvis rather than around the waist. If you need the belt tighter, you can also roll the patient on their sides, helping with the handles you now have on the patient, and cinch tighter in the back. One other note is that you want to try and center the belt as best you can. This will make it easier to do the functions when you go to get the patient up. Another way that we talked about inserting the belt is with the patient in supine. Again, you can see that we're going to slide it through the normal lumbar lordosis, and again, for speed in the video, I'm pulling up from the opposite side, but this is best done by moving around to the opposite side on the patient. Again, I want to demonstrate here the cinch motion, right, left, on all 3 belt buckles, and that helps them get snug on patients from a girth of 28 inches all the way up to 60 inches. For attaching the thigh supports, you want to attach the one carabiner to one of the lateral webbing loops. You bring the thigh support through the patient's leg and then attach the carabiner to another loop that holds it snug. This has been repeated on the opposite side, and again you attach the carabiner to the webbing loop, and then you're going to adjust by tightening up the adjustable belt. For bridging, you're going to take 2 long rigid connector straps and attach to the right and left lower borders of the pelvic belt, either at the front or the back. If you want to add assistance, add the bungee straps and tighten until they're assisting with the activity. Anytime you see 2 asterisks, that means that you need the UMCS Elite system to be able to do this activity. So when you come to bridge the patient, to assist with bridging, the hanger bar should be transverse across the patient's hips. Use the long connector straps on each side, clipping the carabiners at the top of the hanger bar, making sure the tail of the connector strap points down. If the carabiner does not easily fit and fully close, use the universal connector strap and attach the carabiner to the O-ring. You're then going to clip the lower carabiners to the webbing loops on the lower edges of the pelvic belt. This can be done anterior or posteriorly, but does work better if you have them attached to the posterior loops. Adjust the straps to take up the slack, use the motor on the lift to raise the hips to where you need them, and then you can provide assistance. If you want to use the lift to go up and down with a patient attempting at assisting, you can also do that. Alternatively, if you have the UMCS Elite system, you can add a bungee strap to each side to provide further assistance. This position is also helpful to give a stretch to a tight hip flexor by using it on one side only. And if you want to do that, just clip one carabiner to the side that is tight, and you can use a second carabiner also, but you want them both attached to the one side, and raise the hip to where the stretch is felt. To switch from bridging to rolling, you're going to leave the straps connected to the overhead hanger bar and take the additional 2 long rigid connector straps from and attach them to the hanger bar also. You're going to take the long rigid connector straps from the lower edge of the pelvic belt that you will be rolling towards. Hook it to the upper rim at the back of the pelvic belt, and this works best with a 2-point hanger bar, as we'll see in the video. So to switch from rolling tasks, the pull is going to have to change from the bilateral hips to unilateral waist and hips. Unhook the carabiner from the side you're rolling to, and swivel the hanger bar so that it is now parallel to the body. The second connector strap clips to the upper rim of the pelvic belt. It is acceptable to have more than one clip on each webbing loop. Tighten to the adjustable length connector strap and use the motor on the lift to assist as needed. Again, with the Elite system, the bungee straps can be used to assist or resist movement as needed. The patient should always be instructed to help as much as possible, and the patient work can be increased by lowering the lift to increase the range through which the patient needs to roll. The next change is from side lying to sitting up. You will need 2 straps in front and 2 behind of the patient, and you want to hang the swivel bar transversely so that it is again across the patient's body. You are going to need the additional 2 long rigid straps, and you're going to unhook the carabiner from the lower pelvic belt edge, bring it around the patient's back, hooking the webbing loop at the top edge of the pelvic belt. So again, let's forward to the video. You're going to keep the strap that is attached to the top of the pelvic belt tight to hold the patient on their side lying. Take the one from the lower rim at the patient's hips, and you're going to clip it in the front upper rim of the pelvic belt. Then you're going to take the other two connector straps, remembering that the loose tail hangs down, and connect them to the torso support, one in the front of the patient and one in the back of the patient. To sit up, the connector straps need to be attached to the top rim of the pelvic belt and the torso support, which comes under the ribs. If using a 2-point hanger bar, it should be transversely over the patient's body again. 4-point hanger bars will also work well for this as well. You will have 2 straps in the back and 2 in front to raise the patient up. Depending on the kind of lift system you're using, you may want to put a slider sheet under the patient's bottom before sitting up. An XY ceiling lift arrangement works the best because the motor cassette will move vertically over the patient. But if you're using a single rail, you will want to slide the patient directly under the lift. Otherwise, as you can see here, the patient may feel like the lift is pulling them at an angle. Bring the motor forward so the patient is sitting up straight and not leaning backwards. An alternative method for sitting up is to put the torso support directly behind the patient. This is showing how to use a slide under the patient as well. And normally, I would go out to the good side of a patient who has an orthopedic problem. However, for reasons for the camera angles and this particular case, we needed to do it to this side. But you can see here the torso support is posterior to the patient. And then once they come up, you can then switch the straps from the torso support to the upper rim of the pelvic belt. And both ways are perfectly acceptable to get the patient up to sitting. This is another application for the side lying to sitting. This uses a dependent floor-based lift. This is a 2-person application because the therapist here is facilitating the patient to come up to a side lying to sitting position. So they're able to use their hands with a second person lifting the lift up to cue and help facilitate the patient. You will see in this particular therapist's use, they did not put the additional connector straps to the opposite side of the pelvic belt. This would have saved them a little bit of time when they come up to a sitting position. And this particular patient was fairly independent in sitting balance, just needed to work on the side lying to sitting portion of the task. If this patient did not have good sitting balance, you would certainly want the connectors attached to the upper rim of the pelvic belt, both anteriorly and posteriorly, for additional support. To transition from sitting balance, or from side lying to sitting balance, if you're using the 4-point hanger bar, you just need to unhook the carabiners from the torso support and hook them to the top of the pelvic belt. If you're using a 2-point hanger bar, you do need to switch the bar to be now in line with the patient's shoulders again. To do this, you're going to take the strap from the back torso support and hook it onto the pelvic rim. The key is that the hanger bar needs to be shoulder to shoulder rather than antero-posterior. If you want to work on sitting balance side to side, then keep the bar antero-posterior, as this will allow maximum freedom of movement from side to side. However, to switch the hanger bar, you're going to unclip one connector strap from the front and move it to the back hook on the hanger bar. This will swing the hanger bar around, and then what you do is unclip the other loop from the back and move it to the other side. You are going to have to take it off the torso support and hook it onto the pelvic belt. You're going to end up with 2 long rigid connector straps posteriorly and 2 anteriorly from the top of the pelvic support belt to the hanger bar. If you've not already attached the thigh supports, you need to do so before standing the patient up. However, once you have this configuration, you can work on sitting balance or sit to stand and ambulation tasks. So before we go to sitting to standing, you can either use a ceiling lift or a dependent lift, or you can do a powered sit to stand lift, all with the Universal Mobility Coach system. You do need to hook the carabiner nearest the adjuster buckle to the lateral webbing loop for attaching the thigh supports. Pass the thigh support in front of the thigh, under and lateral, coming up posteriorly, and hook the other carabiner to another lateral loop. You saw this in the earlier video. One thing to mention here though is that it does not matter if you start lateral and come medial, or if you start medial and come lateral. So if you go through the legs and come posterior, or you start posterior through the legs and come anterior, it does not matter as long as you have the thigh support in place. So some other mechanisms for sit to stand. You can use a ceiling lift with a 4-point hanger bar. This shows a traverse system, and the therapist is going to facilitate the sit to stand. This is fairly slow, but again, the lift is doing the work. This is a 2-person application because you need a second person over here to work the lift, and the first therapist is all facilitation work. In the second facilitation work, again, she's working on the lift-off position, so you can adjust the tension in the straps to support whichever portion of that task you feel you need to work on. If you want to use the UMCS with a sit-to-stand lift, you can with a lock and loop string style lift or with any of the sit-to-stand lifts. Again, I want to reiterate that you just need to check for compatibility with your lift company to ensure that the UMCS is approved for use with their sit-to-stand lifts. In this case, you're going to unhook the long rigid connector straps from the pelvic belt, and you're going to thread the strings through the anterior webbing triangle and assemble the lock and loop apparatus according to the manufacturer's instructions. If you want to pull to come from more from the hips or the ischial tuberosity areas, you want to slide the UMCS down as low as you can on the patient's pelvis and try to get the lower rim of the pelvic belt as close to their ischial tuberosities as you can. So here we show one style of a sit-to-stand lift using the thigh supports, and this patient is able to help a fair amount. And then the second lift shows sit-to-stand using an overhead lift device. Again, sometimes you need to play with the different speeds of the lifts, but the idea is that the UMCS provides optimal opportunity for facilitation and patient active participation. Additional measures to stop the belt from riding up. Some patients tend to push back or are more pear-shaped, and their body mass distribution makes it difficult to keep the pelvic belt down, even if you start getting it nice and low and nice and tight. We're going to show you how to use an additional torso support around the buttocks to help achieve a better solution for preventing the pelvic belt from riding up. And this is shown with a sit-to-stand with a lock and loop style, but it will work with any sit-to-stand device. So as the patient comes up, you're going to see here that there's the additional torso support underneath their buttocks. They do have the thigh supports on here, but there's an additional torso support, which is doubling as an extra buttock support to stop this belt from riding up. You will see that it's hooked into the same webbing loop, and that's perfectly acceptable. So from the patient's posterior, you can see that you can adjust the length. This is very useful if you're toileting a patient. So you can lift the buttock support up, and then when the patient is done toileting, you can slide it back down and tighten again before they go to stand up. Again, we showed the standing and gait, but this is another way to work on gait with overhead lift systems, where the patient has the thigh supports on. That way they're fully supported if they should lose their balance. And this can also be done with a dependent floor lift. Again, the goal here is to show multiple different lifts, multiple different ways to use the UMCS The ceiling lift gives you a little bit more freedom, as the floor lift does require the therapist to navigate around the bases of the lift, but it can be done and provides another solution for ambulation. There is an alternate thigh support use where you can put the thigh straps circumferentially around the patient's thighs if it is uncomfortable for the patient to put them through the patient's legs. Again, there's 2 asterisks by this one because you can only do this with the UMCS Elite system, which has the additional torso supports and has the short connector straps to attach the circumferentially applied thigh supports to the lower edges of the pelvic belt. This will be shown in a separate video. An additional use of the UMCS, which is not available with any other sling system, is some clothing management options. So with this option, you see that you can take a thigh support off while the patient is on the toilet. This can help them do some clothing management independently. The pelvic belt is still holding the patient in place. And in this application, I have given a fair amount of slack to allow the patient a bit more freedom of movement. If the patient loses their balance or has poor, not so good trunk support, you can tighten these straps to give them less support or less freedom and more support through the pelvic belt. So again, you give the patient as much support as they need, but only the support they need. And you can see there I tightened up the straps so that there was a little bit more support as the patient got more fatigued. You can also use the UMCS with non-powered devices to apply a little bit additional support coming up to a standing position. In this particular case, the patient was able to stand up. However, if they had not been able to give as much assistance, I may have brought the pelvic belt down more over the ischial tuberosities to provide more assistance from a better angle. This last video is going to show you some different uses of the UMCS, and I'm just going to let it play through. You've already seen this part, so I'm going to fast forward just a little bit. Perhaps. So this shows some rolling and turning even without a lift. I showed prior to this where you could attach the straps to a lift. However, this particular application is just a mechanical advantage for the therapist to be able to provide some mechanical assistance with rolling. This can be done even without a lift as long as it doesn't put undue strain on the therapist. You've seen this one where the therapist is able to facilitate. In this particular video, you see a heavier patient. This is a 400-pound patient who did need assistance to stand. And again, he felt that the UMCS supported him. He was able to assist. Had he been very much more dependent, this might not have worked for him. But again, that is that individual assessment for each and every patient to ensure that they are adequately supported and that the UMCS is going to be enough support for their level of assistance and their body mass distribution. This shows how to put the sling system, the lock and loop system through the UMCS. And again, the thigh supports are stopping it from riding up. This shows the bungee cord system where the rigid straps are the stopping mechanism, but the bungee cords are being used to give a little quick stretch for the patient. And this application shows how you can use the torso supports anteriorly around the patient's chest. And there is, you can't see it in this particular video, but there's a short connector strap keeping these 2 torso supports together. And that stops them from pulling out over the sides of the shoulders. You could add an additional one if you wanted to, a little bit higher up. With this application, you can also do ball work. And then this shows how you can take the UMCS and a portable device to take the patient into a contextually relevant environment. So this is working on some ADLs. So in summary, the UMCS is a multi-purpose, multi-function, multi-lift system designed to use with many different patient types, many different patient functions and mobility tasks. But again, I want to reiterate the importance of supporting the patient adequately, and that each and every patient must be assessed by the therapist to ensure that adequate support is given. If in doubt, do not use the UMCS and move to a different support system. Always ensure that you use the rigid strap and the elastic strap together, never the elastic on its own. Always ensure the carabiner is properly clipped in to the webbing loop and is not half clipped. Always double check to make sure your patient is not being pinched by any part of the UMCS or by any of the straps or the carabiner clips. Always check for signs of wear. Ensure that the UMCS is compatible with your lift, and only use approved mechanisms and components of the UMCS. This video is not designed to, instead of reading the instruction manual, it is still fully recommended that the instruction manual is fully read and fully understood. And if you have any questions about the UMCS, about the uses, about the types of patients, or any questions at all about using the Universal Mobility Coach System, please contact Margaret at inspireoutcomes.com. And thank you and good luck with using your Universal Mobility Coach System.